That was Fuck Off and Die.
Oh, is this a new Dark Throne show?
Yeah, it must be. But actually, that wasn't Dark Throne. Who was that, Mark?
That's Voivod from their
Rrröööaaarrr. Umlauts. Lots of umlauts.
3 or 4 O's, 2 umlauts, lots of R's, and
oh boy, if it's Voivod, that must mean, where are we, Mark?
Oh, this is Canadian metal, part 3, technically part 2 in our series of. I guess because we did an album spotlight.
Yeah, because we had Annihilator, so this is part 3, and then part 4 will be the mystery album of that we'll have to reveal when you get to that episode. Yeah, this is I titled it Extreme LY Technical, so extremely technical. That's the theme here. We kind of did our focus on thrash the last time, even though there were some extreme bands in that thrash show. I think you could make the argument that Slaughter kind of toes the line between the two.
It's proto-death metal almost, yeah. But
yet it had some of its roots still in thrash,
totally.
So it was kind of a one of those tough to call. Plus, it fit with Sacrifice and some of that, because thematically, most of these bands that we're focusing on, in fact, I think every single one of them hails from a certain geographical region of Canada, which would be the mighty weird Quebec.
The French Quarter.
Yeah, so obviously that's done something in a way, much the same way that,
Well, multilingual, you're obviously going to have more musical proficiency, right?
Multilingual equals
so it's it's like you got your brutality and you've got your technicality. It's just like speaking English and speaking French.
Exactly.
The romantic language and the brutal language.
Yep.
The brutally to the point language of
the brutal language. Yeah, and had we had an extra 7 minutes, I would have loved to have either opened up appropriately with probably the band that starts Canada in this direction, which would be Rush.
But you can turn on any classic rock station and catch one of those within 45 minutes.
You don't hear 2112 very often, though.
No.
So, but Working Man you hear every so often. But both those, it was going to be one of those two. Nothing. No Tom Sawyer, Closer to the Heart. Not that I have anything wrong with those, but
Tom Sawyer blew my mind as a kid.
Yeah, I love that song. And so obviously Rush is kind of the major Canadian rock band of the 70s era, and because they were such a prog techie kind of band, I think that must have worn off on some of the kids that were kind of growing up listening to that stuff, idolizing Rush to be the big Canadian metal band.
Yeah, there's probably been some kind of dissertation written on why Canadian music is as it is. I'm wondering if it's like trying to do it like if it's one-upsmanship for U.S. bands.
Yeah, it could be.
I guess it wouldn't always work, but a lot of U.S. bands are kind of more, I guess, straightforward in comparison.
Sure.
And we got to raise the bar and show them what those Canadians can really do.
Yeah. Well, and England was the same way though too. Genesis and King Crimson and Soft Machine and a lot of, and even the Germans.
Australia was the exact opposite.
Yeah, it was like stripped down. Radio Birdman,
Dirty.
AC/DC. So who knows? I don't understand how the 4 great, I guess, English speaking regions of the world kind of operate. I go South Africa. That's another one, but I don't know much about the South African metal scene.
I don't think they do either.
They had a music scene, but it was more anti-apartheid, kind of like Afro pop stuff in the 70s, like
okay.
Hugh Masekela. He played at Monterey '67
and played an open for Gorky Park.
Yeah, I'm sure he did. When are we gonna do that Russian metal show with Gorky Park and Mental Home? That's coming soon.
Yeah, there's probably a handful of other ones too. But
I'm sure if we explore, maybe if we did Eastern Europe, we could throw
Czech
the
stuff
Czech
in
scene
there.
and Hungarian and some of that stuff. But Voivod, this is a band we've definitely played before.
Have we?
Yeah, we played them on the '88 show.
That's right. Okay.
We played Tribal Convictions, I do believe, from Dimensional Hatröss, which may probably make an appearance here soon. Not that song, but that album. And we want to play F Off and Die because for 2 reasons. One, when you get to the end of the show, it'll kind of start to make sense to you. And then 2, because it shows you the roots of how raw Voivod sort of started off before they kind of changed directions into the more technical stuff.
It's very, very Venom.
Yeah, Venom. you mentioned Destruction. You heard some riffs in there, very punkish.
It's a weird mixture of really kind of like straightforward riffs and then like some kind of arpeggio thing that gets thrown in there weirdly.
Yeah, and already they're showing like with the arpeggios and some of that stuff. Just their odd kind of approach to composition, and Piggy, the guitar player, or Dennis Demore, if you're going that route, who writes a lot of the songs. He his chord choices were odd. They were kind of off-putting, and you won't hear him so much on this song. But
very like dissident stuff, and it almost gets progressively more that way throughout their career.
I've heard him called, like, when they make the evolution, which you'll hear in the next set of music, sci-fi thrash or space thrash, or all these kind of weird terms, because
I don't really know where that comes from outside of like the imagery, but most of the lyrical stuff seems to be more political. It's like punk. Yeah,
it's political, but there was a lot of like anti-technology and fear of technology kind of lyrics and stuff. So there was always this like computer age, like 1984 kind of theme, which is the dystopian, anti, which is punk in a way too. It's just sci-fi punk or something. It's kind of bizarre.
People love labels, so
yeah. Oh, and we love genrifying things. But Rrröööaaarrr, which is hard to get. We were actually just looking for it.
$53 on CD or $100 on vinyl.
Yeah, so very, very affordable. Neither of us own Rrröööaaarrr, but we wanted to play that to kind of set into motion the sort of whole Canadian tech scene that was going to start off in the mid 80s, and Voivod's definitely the impetus for all that. Besides Piggy, you've got Blackie on bass, Away on drums, and did you say it was it Blackie or Away that did most of the artwork for a lot of these?
Did, I think. Away. Well, at least he did the
Dimensional
cover.
Hatröss.
Yeah, and I'm guessing he probably did a lot of the other stuff.
Yeah, I think he might have done Roar and War and Pain, because that features that same sort of like robotic kind of.
He's got a name
on the front.
Like, Craglore or something. I mean,
is that who?
Something. Yeah, I was just looking at T-shirts. Okay. So.
Which I think there's a song on Roar called like Craglore the Annihilator or something sweet like that.
I think that's like their Eddie or something.
Yeah. So and then Snake on vocals, and you've always had like Snake obviously on Fuck Off and Die is pretty raw and punk kind of style, but he'll change his vocals throughout, and you said that was always a hard disconnect for you because of his singing styles.
The later on stuff, it was just it just didn't do anything for me.
Yeah,
it's and I can see why they did it, because it's like such a counterpoint to the rest of the music. I mean, it's almost, I guess, similar to like almost like a more off kilter version of like what Tool does vocally or something.
Sure. Yeah, I could see that.
But it's
speaking of prog technical kind of stuff,
that's basically been the biggest thing that's turned me off from him. It's just like ugh. But then the first stuff, I mean, really, I don't have a ton of experience with Voivod outside of listening to stuff for the show, but I went out and got War and Pain, the 3-disc set.
Just bought that, so.
And the earlier stuff really kind of grabbed me just because it's raw, but you can still see the seeds of what they'll be coming at.
Yeah, and I knew I have been kind of trying to force myself to understand Voivod for like the last year, just kind of picking apart records and stuff, and hearing that early stuff, I kind of knew that you would probably dig it. I don't have it on CD to like lend you, so it was just always sitting on my computer, but so 86 is when Roar comes out, but then by 87 they put out a record called Killing Technology, and already there you can start to hear some of the more, I guess, sci-fi riffing. The vocals are still pretty raw, still pretty punkish, but now you're starting to hear some more progressive elements, some of the new wave of British heavy metal. I noticed some Diamond Head stuff that you hear in a song like Overreaction, which we're going to play in a moment.
The stop-startiness and all that kind of stuff. I mean, you can hear a lot if you're familiar with like the last 4 Enslaved records. So there's riffs on here that sound like it's right off Isa or something.
Yeah, that's pretty killer. Yeah, and the Enslaved song you really pointed out is the one we'll play after Overreaction, which is Macrosolutions to Megaproblems, which that's a mouthful for you, from the aforementioned.
Sounds like a Brutal Truth EP.
Yeah, no doubt. From the Dimensional Hatröss record from '88, which we already played a song from back in the top 10 most important years of metal, or
crucial years.
Yes. Yeah, I knew there was a word I was missing. And of course, these guys, as I said, they hail from Quebec. I'm not for sure how close to Montreal they are. My geography is not great when it comes to that part of the world.
It's very spread out from what I can tell.
Yeah, and so I don't know if it's like what you hear with like the Swedish scene, where there's different little pockets or
like
things.
Norway. There's like 4 pockets basically in the country.
So, but if you guys know, obviously we're newbies to Voivod, but we definitely knew that you have to talk about Voivod when you're talking about the kind of technical, extreme kind of side of the Canadian scene, because it really was a counterpoint to what the sort of simplicity that like bands like Exciter, Razor, and Anvil were bringing in Ontario.
That punk attitude. And this is another band that I always noticed as a kid of, guys that had the mohawks and whatever, like the punk crowd. They could always get away with wearing a Voivod shirt or a Motorhead shirt, so.
Yeah, and this is a band where I know Mark and I probably have racked our brains before, because, everyone spot checks them as an influence, and yet it was so hard for, like, both of us to kind of get into them and penetrate.
I think the problem for me was, like, where I started, which was, like, 89, 90 era.
Yeah, like Angel Rat and some of that stuff that's not really, like, not very, very interesting.
And I think some of that was when Snake left. Mm-hmm. So there was different vocalists. I don't know if that was the vocalist that I first heard and I hated or what. But.
Yeah. And so then Dimensional Hatröss was like the record that really like kicked them open. Killing Technology was sort of where they start making that transition, but Dimensional Hatröss was pretty popular. And I think that's the one. Is that the one that they do the Batman cover on? Yeah, they do the Batman on there. And it's a theme record, really. I mean, it tells a story on the whole record. It's got a prologue. It's got just
concept record,
different concept stuff, which of course Rush and any prog band is kind of known
Genesis,
for. Yeah. And
Peter Gabriel.
This gets them signed to a major label, which then they put out the next year, 1989, Nothingface. And so we're going to play the title track from Nothingface as well. And one thing I want to mention about Nothingface, and I have it written down, is I think it's either this or Dimensional Hatröss that they produced the record. It was Nothingface was produced by Terry Brown, who produced Rush Records. So there's your full circle connection. And then when they went out on tour for Nothingface, they kind of had the foresight to they were headlining a tour, because at this point they're fairly popular. They've got a video in rotation for the Pink Floyd cover of Astronomy Divine, and they take Faith No More, Real Thing era, and Soundgarden, Louder Than Love era out on tour. Just pretty hip, because they kind of, I think they said they saw them as like the future of music in a way. And I mean, I guess you couldn't have picked two better bands in '89 in America, at least, that were going to be the future of.
And two bands that have one has recently just done a reunion tour, and the other one's on their way. So.
Sure. And I've seen neither of them live. You've seen Soundgarden, right?
Yeah. I saw them in like '92.
Yeah, it's a bummer. I'm hoping to see him again before it all peters out.
Chris Cornell has long hair again, man. It's like you never left.
It's like 93 all over again. So, but so we've got a trio of Voivod songs on the way, which will kind of introduce you to the kind of foundation of this technical metal approach, and then of course Quebec starts to get a little louder and a little more, almost as Voivod starts to become less metal and less metallic and more experimental.
Let's crossfade over to Gorguts.
We'll crossfade over to Gorguts, and we'll talk more about Gorguts when we come back. But just be prepared. Check your volume if you need to.
So I do that for them so they don't have to.
Oh, that's good. That's good. So we've got Overreaction from Killing Technology, Macrosolutions, the Megaproblems, and then Nothingface, followed by the first of our Gorgut tunes, Disincarnated.
Overloaded, the warning lies. We're on that line. Nobody Revolution is evident. Chaos mongers are resistant.
that was Gorguts with Disincarnated, and then before that we had a trio from Voivod, Nothingface, Macrosolutions, the Megaproblems, and Overreaction. And one thing Mark had mentioned that he heard, especially on the Macrosolutions tune, is the enslaved riffing. I mean, it's this weird, almost atonal black metal kind of riffing.
Even the drumming.
Yeah.
Whereas this kind of stop-start weird off-time thing.
Yeah, and I noticed, like, it has a King Crimson feel, which is King Crimson's a band that, like, Enslaved worships. Enslaved totally. Worships all that prog stuff now, so kind of, comes full circle in its own bizarre way, And we'll talk more about, black metal later. Canada's not really known for its black metal. It's more known for thrash and death metal.
I can't think of any Canadian black metal bands right
although there might be one that was proto-black metal that might show up not in this episode, but possibly in our Hall of Fame episode. But I don't want to talk too much about that. So if you got your thinking caps on, you might be able to guess who we're talking about. It's a band that we've clearly overlooked if you have a Canadian metal PhD. And then Nothingface, I noticed, speaking of Scandinavia stuff, a carbonized feel, very jazzy. Obviously carbonized came afterwards,
Yeah.
But this
Spanish
definitely,
Fly, dude.
Yeah, great song. And this sound from Nothingface really kind of inspired, I think, the whole experimental, like, kind of proggy metal sort of movement. Not necessarily the atheist cynic stuff, but like the much more bizarre kind of side that you see, whether it's the Watchtowers or any of those kind of bands that just did some different things, more the late 90s kind of stuff. But
the serious leg of it, not the Mr. Bungles and Faith No More and all that kind of stuff, which technically is progressive metal.
Sure. And I think I would argue that, like, Mr. Bungle and probably Faith No More were kind of almost contemporaries of Voivod at this point.
Oh, totally.
Late 80s, early 90s. So, but then we get to Gorguts and Luc Lemay, another Quebecer. I don't know how close, again, to Montreal, like if, a lot of these bands were in the suburbs of Montreal. It seems like they would be, because that would probably be like the
socialized stuff. So
this is all the
doesn't matter how far they are away.
Yeah. What was the song we were listening to where you said the Cryptopsy song where you said he was screaming about socialized medicine?
Yeah, totally.
But definitely one of the more memorable riffs on their debut record, which is called Consider Dead, which was put out in 1991 on Roadrunner.
Lovely Dan Seagrave cover.
Sure. Yeah, he does both the...
Produced by Scott Burns.
Yep, and Luc Lemay.
And Luc Lemay. That's the big thing, because actually when we were listening to it earlier, it has almost exactly the same drum production and bass production of Napalm Death Harmony Corruption.
Yeah.
Except the guitars now are almost... It's like a little bit warmer, but also just on... Because most of Burns' stuff was so condensed and just like, it was almost like it was blowing out of a bottle or something. There's so just dense, and I don't think there was a whole lot of air in it. Everything was just so like in your face, and you can definitely tell the influence of Luc Lemay on the production, especially in the guitar production, I think. Yeah, and Luc Lemay is the vocalist and lead guitar player, and he's really the only original member still. He's kind of and he still wears a fanny pack. Yes, we saw him at Metal Fest doing that, and he is the guy. I guess he's, speaking of like the Annihilator show we did last week, the Jeff Waters of Gorguts. I mean, he's like the kind of the heart and soul, the only consistent guy. Really nice guy. Yeah, he seems very pretty friendly. Yep. And also on these first two Gorguts, the kind of classic records, I guess, traditional death metal with some tech stuff thrown in. You have Sylvain Marceau on lead guitar, Eric Giguier. Je ne sais quoi. Yeah, Giguier on bass, and Stéphane Provenchor on drums. And I probably just brutalized those. Yeah. And that Provenchor guy actually wrote he wrote the drum tracks to Obscura, which we'll talk about later. Okay. But he actually isn't on Obscura, but he wrote like I can see Gorgut stuff actually being all like tabbed out and written out. Okay, here's what we're gonna do, guys. Okay, put them on your music stands. Yeah. Just pretty wild. So one of the things obviously Gorguts is known for is being one of like the supreme kind of technical death metal bands, and definitely Canada's answer to like what Atheist and Cynic and even Human Era Death were kind of doing across the border there. And, but I think even more, I think it was almost like taking New York death metal sound and like basically amping up the technicality.
A lot of
because the brutality is really there.
Sure,
still.
the Suffocation, Cannibal Corpse kind of thing going on there.
Didn't Chris Barnes sing in a couple tunes on this?
Yeah, he's a guest on a couple of these, which shows you that this is their debut, and they've got Chris Barnes on 2 songs, James Murphy from Obituary, Testament, Death fame, is playing a solo on the Inoculated Life, I think, which is the last song on the record. And so I think they were unfortunately, I think, a little late to the game. They showed up.
They were pretty big. I mean, back in the day, I remember.
But what I mean is, like, they kind of came out, and like as they came out, though, it was like in the like 91, 92, 93, which is when death metal was kind of starting to go a different direction. Almost,
well, and black metal pretty much eclipsed everything.
Yeah,
it was beginning to.
Whereas like all the Florida bands got started like 88, 89, and moved forward. It seems like you're right. Gorguts came, they were big, and then all of a sudden gone.
It was for like a year and a half, and then it was like.
Yeah, and by the time they put out Erosion and Sanity, which is the next record we're going to hear something from, their second record, which was even bigger, I think, at first than Considered Dead. Oh yeah, in terms of album sales,
especially with
and things
touring.
like that.
I believe I saw them on that tour. I don't remember who they played. That was probably at a festival.
Oh, okay.
They were fantastic live. They were always like above and beyond what most brutal death metal bands were.
Well, not just that, but to be a brutal death metal band, which can be a muddy sound live anyways, and then be technical on top of that, and to sound great live, says a lot. I was surprised, as you were, when we saw not only Gorguts, but then 2 years ago we saw Atheist live, and they were pretty, like, you could like hear what was going on. It wasn't like a muddy mess, and you never know when it comes to technical death metal what
you never know when you come to going to a metal show. It might just be all kick drum all night.
Exactly. So
Dima Borger, for instance.
Oh god, don't even talk about how horrible that show was. But the song from Erosion and Sanity we're going to play is called Condemned to Obscurity, and this is kind of not only a fan favorite, because we heard this live last summer, or last late spring, early summer, I guess. Was it Labor Day weekend or Memorial Day weekend at the Maryland Metal Fest? But this is kind of their masterwork, I think, of their early era, because you got the piano playing at the beginning from Luc Lemay. You've got some amazing bass playing on this song all over the place. You've
just
got
like Annihilator, great bass.
Yeah, there you go. Stop start kind of stuff happening, and I don't know where they could have taken this sound after '93. And so I think that's why they, death metal kind of was like fading away, and then these guys disappeared for 5 years, and I think most people thought they were broken up. They were certainly way off my radar screen. And
technical metal, as approaching the 2000s, was just getting like unbelievably over the top to where, what the hell's the band that's super young guys, super big, or used to be big?
What, Origin?
No, it was on Relapse.
Oh boy,
starts with an N.
Necrophagus.
Yeah.
Necrophagus.
Like that kind of stuff, to where they're right on the borderline of just being absolutely retarded.
Sure. Yeah, but the Necrophagus is still good. It's just, you're right, very close.
Yeah, but there's not like necessarily one song you're like, oh, that's my favorite. That's the single.
It's just something you put on and you kind of listen to, and you're like amazed, but then you put it away. I don't listen to Necrophagus much, but Necrophagus is definitely a band that was inspired by bands like Gorguts. You know what I mean? And Obscura. How the band Obscura took their name from the Gorguts record that we're going to talk about. So we've got Condemned to Obscurity, which we'll start off with, from Erosion to Sanity, and then, as I mentioned, they disappear for 5 years, and they come back with this magnum opus, this record that caught a lot of people off guard. And I know I didn't really get into this record at all. And
I never heard it till a couple years ago.
Yeah, and Grindcore Coon did. He was way into it, and it seems like the kind of thing he would be, because it's bleak and
it's just fucking oppressive. It's just,
atonal.
It's like the soundtrack of watching everyone you love being killed.
Yeah, it's like the apocalypse and stuff burning. Like burning hellfires and stuff.
Yeah, I was commenting to Jason earlier that it seems like, I wonder if he had some really like significant personal issues or something, or if he's just really good at channeling emotion. Who knows?
It might be it, because the guy that he was inspired by, he's inspired by several people, but he was really into a lot of avant-garde classical composers around this time. Stockhausen, who was a big inspiration for like the Beatles and Brian Wilson and stuff, and then John Cage, who obviously inspired the Velvet Underground, a lot of other bands to do stuff. But one guy in particular that I've heard mentioned is a Polish composer named Krzysztof Penderecki, and he was famous in the 60s. He did Thernady to the Victims of Hiroshima, which is an appropriate classical piece. And then he did another one, some religious ones as well, on St. Francis, I think. And, so obviously that's kind of his inspiration for what's going on. And there's a tune on here that we don't have time to play called Cloud It. That's 9.5 minutes. And it's slowed down. It's oppressive. It's pretty angry, soundtrack pretty nasty.
Eye surgery or something.
Yeah, it's like it's the end of everything almost. But the tune we are going to play is Earthly Love. And I wanted to play Nostalgia too because I love the riff in that, but we just don't have time. And plus you kind of get the point with this. Earthly Love has these violins in the middle that are very very unsettling and kind of like almost like the Tony Conrad, John Cale kind of approach to playing violin and viola.
Because that's the thing that I really kind of dig on. It's because when you say, oh, great, it's got piano and violin, okay, it's going to... Because you can either take it like My Dying Bride and do it like really
super
emotionally.
Classical
or you can go over the top and it sounds like Dimmu Borgir where it's like orchestra hits and stuff. And this is like the violin or viola or whatever he's playing is like incredibly... it sets the mood like immediately. It's almost like the Bernard Herrmann Psycho score, but like played on a fiddle, almost like mad.
Yeah. And one person or some of the research I did on this record, because again, this has been a record that probably when you hear this song Earthly Love, you'll like parts of it, but it's something you need to hear a couple times to really penetrate because it's so dense. But it was being compared to Captain Beefheart Trout Mask Replica, which makes all the sense in the world to me if you know that record. Because that's a record, the first time you hear it, you're like, what the fuck is this? This is
garbage.
And then, like, I love it. It's probably my favorite Beefheart record, and so... I don't know. It's got that Frank Zappa Beefheart kind of approach to like compositional style, almost in a way. So, and then we're going to transition into a band called Cryptopsy, which maybe some of you heard of. And again, another band hailing from Montreal, another technical death metal band, and they're kind of like the next evolution beyond Gorguts because they take everything Gorguts does and they go faster. Catchier,
more extreme.
I mean, as far as the vocals are just like
they're retarded.
Lord Worm, you can't hear a word he's saying,
No, and it doesn't matter.
Nor should you try, and it's I remember when this record came out, None So Vile, which is technically their second record, but their first like fully realized, fully well produced kind of record because they had a record called Blasphemies Made Flesh that came out before this, but this came out on War Records, which was odd for a Canadian band because that's a mainly Swedish
first
label.
North American band on the label, I believe, but it was almost exclusively Swedish, if I remember right.
Almost 100% Swedish. Yeah. So at this point, it was our Excretion, Arch Enemy, In Flames.
Yeah, Warning Sign, all that stuff's from Sweden.
Yeah. And then all of a sudden, here comes Slit Your Guts from Cryptopsy. And this song, for those of you that have been longtime listeners of Requiem podcast, has a special place in our hearts. Tell us about that.
Yeah, our first Welcome to Hell show, where it's basically our kind of like mini essay on why we're starting the podcast. It starts out with Slit Your Guts.
We open and close with Slit Your Guts. Yeah. And it's got just such a memorable riff right at the beginning,
totally.
And it just like hits you in the gut. Obviously Slit Your Guts. It's there. In the song, and it's got some.
There's great lyrics.
And Flo Mounier on drums is incredible. I mean, I
talk about blast beats, man.
I remember seeing Cryptopsy, and it was the Metal Fest you didn't go to, the one that Emperor played at, and Brutal. It was the grindcore stage with Brutal Truth and all those bands. And when he got done playing, he waddled and then fell over. He was walking off stage and he kind of was like, you could tell he's like low, lightheaded, low blood sugar, and then boom, he just fell over for a second.
That's an unbelievable amount of, especially how he's playing blast beats, because there's tons of, there's like the, what the hell, Mike from Suffocation. The way he plays blast beats is like full force hard, but he's a big guy.
Yeah.
And then there's the kind where you're just like kind of rocking the stick and it's almost bouncing back and forth, but... Yeah, and me trying to play both styles, both are a pain in the ass.
Yeah.
So I can totally see that. Speaking of Brutal Truth real quick, I hear a lot of Brutal Truth isms in Cryptopsy, a lot, especially off from Extreme Conditions.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
As far as like vocal lines and patterns and some of the hooks in the song as well.
And that's the weird thing about this. We're going to play Slit Your Guts and Phobophile, and Phobophile has this like really super memorable riff right in the middle of this brutality. It starts off with like kind of a weird eerie piano kind of piece. There's these sick like Primus like bass breakdowns in the middle of some of these songs. Yeah. It's such a weird record, I don't remember hearing anything like it before.
Yeah, one of the first grind, I think, taking more, instead of using death metal as the backdrop, they're using like grindcore, which up until that point didn't necessarily have a ton of, there's technical players, but there wasn't a whole lot of flash.
Yeah.
Because some of the solos that you hear in like Slit, it's like, where the hell did that come from?
Yeah, it's
like, how do you transition from this super fast, like almost Swedish death metal riff to this?
Yeah, it is pretty cool. And Lord Worm is known, for his sick screams and different things as well. And he's kind of
eating mealworms off a plate.
Yeah. So they're a while. This is about as extreme as the tech thing gets in Canada, at least for my money. There's bands like Cataclysm, which we decided not to play, and it's not my cup of tea. Maybe there are Cataclysm fans out there.
A bunch of times, never because I was there to see them.
Yeah.
And when I worked for Relapse in the 90s, I heard plenty of it, and it's never done anything to me. It had the kind of weird. Some of the atonal stuff that like Voivod had going on, but there's nothing else there to pull me in. Mm-hmm. It was just kind of annoying.
Yeah,
is basically what I got. And the singer was kind of a dick.
Oh, was he? Yeah,
at least like in interviews, he always came across as being kind of cocky.
Sure. They're a band that's probably like I need to like probably give them a second chance and listen to them.
There's a lot of other better stuff to go back and give a check or first chance to.
Well, if those of you out there are Cataclysm fans, give us a recommendation of where we should start from. So, but anyways, let's get some music. Let's hear our Gorguts tunes. We've got Condemned to Obscurity and Earthly Love from Obscura, and then we've got Cryptopsy, Slit Your Guts, and Phobophile, and then we'll end with The End, and we'll talk more about them when we come back. All right, that was The End with Scent of Elegance from Within Dividia from 2004, and then we heard...
Isn't that an Antonio Banderas cologne?
Yeah, with Scent of Elegance, yes. Yeah, it might be. And then we had the pair of Cryptopsy and Gorguts tunes before that, Phobophile, Slit Your Guts, Earthly Love, and Condemned to Obscurity. And the last couple tunes that we have to play here for you from a kind of a mathcore band that you just heard, The End, and a band called Martyr, which actually emerged in the late 90s around the time that Obscura came out and Cryptopsy and stuff. This is just kind of a couple other examples of bands not quite as big as Gorguts, Cryptopsy, Voivod, that are kind of still flying the flag of tech metal, I guess, in Canada. In the end are hail from Montreal, but yet they kind of toe this line between Converge, Jane Doe kind of stuff on this record in particular, and then Dillinger, the sort of mathcore kind of stuff. And I remember getting into them off their first EP, which was called, oh my gosh, I'm drawing a blank. It had like a a weird like amoeba
system or
kind
something?
of thing. Yeah, trachea transfer or something, I think it was called. And Tom Haley actually got us into that. I remember at one of the Metal Fests. And it's interesting because these guys will evolve even beyond this, kind of in the same way that Voivod will with their very next record, which is like they have like these songs that have these like epic, like sad anathema like tunes on them, and it's crazy. So, and then Martyr, which we're gonna sort of be one of our closing numbers, debuted in 1997 with Hopeless Hopes, and we're gonna play the title track from that. And that's one where you heard a lot of cynic kind of stuff. And
a lot. Even like the drumming's very Sean Reinhardt sounding. You know, it's it's not. I mean, it's not like the total like rip off of that either. There's definitely its own stuff going on.
Sure, it's just got some of the melodies and some of the jazzyisms of that, you know, and the compositional styles.
The guitar tone, I think, really kind of struck me as sounding very Cynic-esque, like Focus era stuff.
Yeah, it's like Cynic meets Voivod, kind of in terms of some of the guitar kind of tones and stuff, along with a band that we're really into called Obscura, which is kind of, you know, takes almost all this Canadian tech stuff and then packages it in like a European kind of way, along with like some pestilence,
very German flair to it as well.
Yeah. So, and the main guy from Martyr, we should say, Daniel Mongrain, is he's the vocalist and guitar player for the band. He's connected to Voivod as a live guitarist. He was in Cryptopsy, he was in Gorguts, and he was in another band called Q Vadis, which I actually had, but we didn't have time to fit it in. And they're another kind of cool.
I've heard that name, but I don't.
Cool Canadian kind of technical tech band. So. Anyway, so that kind of gives you, I guess, an example of some of the extremely technical side to Canadian stuff.
But so, what better sums up what Canadian metal means than Darkthrone?
And so
with a song from Fuck Off and Die,
which connects back to Voivod, Fuck Off and Die, and is an ode to Canadian thrash and Canadian metal in general. And so it's
particularly Pile Driver.
Yeah, it's a good way to close out part 3 of Canadian metal, and stay tuned for the Hall of Fame record, which will be coming next week, where we look at an extreme Canadian band in more depth, I guess you should say. So enjoy Martyr, Hopeless Hopes, and Dark Thrones Canadian metal from Requiem Metal Podcast. I'm Jason.
And I'm Mark. Fuck Off and Die.
grand departure. Failure after failure. Until the grand departure.
Like a hammer from hell! Pyrokinesis and take this torch! Sounds that fill me with your remorse! Fucking sound my angry hardcore Canadian metal just the way your weed sound